The most expensive mistake in any negotiation happens before it starts, not at the table, not when the other side pushes back, not when the pressure arrives and you have to decide whether to hold. Before a single word is exchanged, when you've already decided your position needs to be softened, your terms need a disclaimer, your number needs an apology. That decision costs you everything, and you made it alone. Nobody pressured you, nobody asked you to move. You looked at what you wanted, and before anyone had the chance to reject it, you rejected it yourself. You discounted your own position before the other side knew what it was. You handed them a concession they hadn't earned and didn't ask for, and you called it being reasonable. This is the mechanism Machiavelli identified across every court he studied, every prince he analyzed, every negotiation that produced a winner and a loser. The man who enters with his position already softened has not come to negotiate. He has come to surrender incrementally and call it strategy. The man who enters with his position intact and holds it without visible doubt, that man forces every other party to begin from the only place left, whatever they can take from someone who will not move. The gap between those two openings is often the entire outcome. This video is about that gap. What self-negotiation actually is, what it costs every time it happens, and how the men who built empires and held thrones for decades understood something about position that most people spend their entire lives never figuring out. That the moment you soften what you want before anyone has challenged it, you have already lost the thing you came for. Self-negotiation is not a single behavior. It is a family of related habits, all of which share the same mechanism, reducing your own position before the other party has applied any pressure. The most visible form is the preemptive softening. You want something. You know what you want. Before you ask for it, you add a disclaimer that reduces the ask, or worse, that signals to the other person that you expect the ask to be rejected. I know this is probably too much, but this sentence does two things simultaneously. It tells the other person that you yourself believe the ask may be excessive, and it tells them that your resistance to a lower counter is limited because you've already introduced doubt about your own position. The second form is the premature concession. You make an offer that includes a concession the other party never asked for. You drop the price before they've responded to the initial number. You add something to the deal before they've indicated dissatisfaction. You solve a problem they haven't yet raised. Every unsolicited concession teaches the same lesson. There is more available here, and it can be obtained without pressure because the person across from you is already applying pressure to themselves. The third form, the most subtle and the most costly, is the multiple option trap. Instead of stating what you want, you offer a range of possibilities. We could do it this way, or this other way, or if that doesn't work, there's always. You have framed yourself as someone seeking an arrangement that is acceptable to the other party, rather than someone stating the terms of an arrangement that you have determined is correct. The moment you offer options, you have moved from a position to a menu. Menus get picked from. The fourth form is need display. You explain how much this matters to you. You describe what's at stake for you personally. You give the other person a detailed picture of your need, which is the same as giving them a detailed picture of the leverage they hold over you. Every additional sentence of explanation about why you want something is a sentence that confirms the depth of your dependency on the outcome. Dependency is the thing being negotiated against. All four forms have the same root. They come from the belief, usually unconscious, sometimes explicit, that softening your position in advance will make the other person more likely to accommodate it. That reducing the ask before you make it will decrease resistance. that showing reasonableness will be rewarded with reasonableness in return. This belief is wrong in almost every context where power is asymmetric or where the other party is sophisticated enough to read what they are seeing. What a capable negotiator on the other side of the table actually hears when you self-negotiate is not reasonableness. It is an announcement. This person is not fully committed to the position they are about to state, and pressure will move them further. They do not relax. They prepare. Machiavelli's fox and lion framework from Chapter 18 of The Prince maps directly onto this. The lion declares its strength openly. The fox reveals nothing. The man who self-negotiates has chosen neither. He has announced his strength while simultaneously announcing its limits. He has tried to be both confident and accommodating, and has achieved only a legible uncertainty that any skilled opponent will immediately begin to work. In the winter of 1872, John D. Rockefeller set out to acquire 26 oil refineries in Cleveland. He was 32 years old. He had founded Standard Oil 2 years earlier. He had leverage, the threat of the South Improvement Company, a secret railroad cartel arrangement that would allow him to undercut any competitor on shipping costs. But that leverage was background pressure, never explicitly named. What he had in the room, in every conversation with every competitor he approached, was a posture that admitted no softness. There is a reason historians and biographers focus on one specific tactical choice Rockefeller made in the Cleveland Massacre that is easy to overlook because it seems counterintuitive. He approached the strongest competitors first, not the weakest. The standard logic of acquisition would suggest beginning with the weakest players, the lowest resistance, the lowest prices, the easiest wins, and building momentum from there. Rockefeller's reasoning inverted this completely. According to Ron Chernow's biography Titan, Rockefeller believed that if he started with the weak refiners, he would face higher prices and stiffer resistance from the strong ones later, once word of the consolidation had spread and the remaining players understood what was happening. Starting with the strongest was a calculated signal. This combination is real, it is going to happen, and the first people who join will get the best terms. The pitch he made to every refinery owner, reconstructed from accounts given to Ida Tarbell and documented in Chernow's biography, was not a soft ask. It did not open with an acknowledgement that the offer might not suit them. It did not add options that gave them a sense of agency over the terms. It stated a conclusion. You see, this scheme is bound to work. It means absolute control by us of the oil business. There is no chance for anyone outside. But we are going to give everybody a chance to come in. You are to turn over your refinery to my appraisers, and I will give you Standard Oil Company, stock or cash, as you prefer, for the value we put upon it. I advise you to take the stock. It will be for your good. Read that pitch carefully. There is no, I know this might not be ideal for you. There is no, I understand if you need time to think about it. There is no range of options designed to locate their comfort zone. There is a description of the situation as Rockefeller had assessed it, a statement of the terms, and a recommendation. The offer is presented as a conclusion that has already been reached, not as an opening position that exists to be discussed. Over the course of early 1872, sources vary on the exact timeline, with some accounts placing it as short as 6 weeks and others at around 3 to 4 months. He had acquired 22 of the 26 refineries. This is not an endorsement of every method Rockefeller used during this period. The historical record is complicated, and the coercion involved was real. But the negotiating posture is instructive, independent of its context. The person who states their position without apology, without preemptive softening, without offering alternatives before alternatives have been requested, That person forces every other party to respond to an established fact, rather than to an invitation for negotiation. Chernow also documented that Rockefeller was trained from early in his career to reveal as little as possible. He wrote his private letters as though they might someday be read by a prosecuting attorney. This same discipline extended to his negotiating behavior. He did not let the other person see the calculation. They received only the conclusion. The reason self-negotiation is so destructive is not just that it weakens a single deal. It is that it changes the information the other party is working with for every subsequent interaction. When you preemptively soften one position, you have demonstrated a pattern. The other person now knows that your opening positions include voluntary discounts, that your stated terms are not your actual floor, and that expressing hesitation or resistance does not need to be backed by any real counter-pressure, because you will apply the pressure to yourself. This information does not disappear after the conversation. It shapes every future exchange. Think about what happens in a relationship, professional or personal. Once this pattern is established, you have trained the other person to wait. They know that if they express the slightest hesitation, the position will move. They know that if they go quiet, you will fill the silence with a lower number. They know that your first statement is not your real statement, so they stop taking your first statement seriously. They stop engaging with it at all. They simply wait for the real offer, the one that comes after you have finished negotiating against yourself, and they start from there. This is how people end up in dynamics where they feel perpetually undervalued, not because the other party is aggressive, but because they have systematically trained the other party over time to expect the pre-compromised version of every ask. Machiavelli identified a related dynamic in Chapter 22 of The Prince, when he described how a prince assesses whether a minister can be trusted. The test is whether the minister thinks more of the prince or of himself. While Machiavelli was writing about political allegiance rather than negotiation tactics, the underlying mechanism he was describing maps directly. He was capturing how people read each other for evidence of alignment and commitment. The minister who is visibly serving his own interests rather than the mission is not just untrustworthy in a moral sense. He is unreliable in a practical sense, because his behavior is shaped by self-protection rather than by the actual requirements of the position. This makes him predictable in the wrong way. The same principle applies to anyone who negotiates against themselves. They are visibly serving their own anxiety rather than the actual position. Every self-imposed concession is evidence that their stated terms are not their actual terms, that the real ask is hidden somewhere behind the softened version they chose to present. A capable observer reads this immediately and begins working to find it. The prince who Machiavelli admires, in Chapter 18, in Chapter 7, in the extended analysis of Cesare Borgia, is the prince whose stated position and actual position are the same thing. Not because he is inflexible, but because he does not announce his flexibility before it is tested. He states what he wants. He holds it. He responds to actual pressure with actual recalibration, not to imagined pressure with preemptive retreat. The opening position is information. The moment you modify it before anyone has asked you to, you have told the other party that the position was not real, that it was an opening bid rather than a statement of terms. Every negotiation that follows will be conducted with that knowledge in the room. For 45 years, the most powerful men in Europe wanted something from Elizabeth I that she never gave them. They wanted to know whether she would marry. And she never told them. Historians who have studied her reign closely suggest this was almost certainly deliberate, that the answer, whatever it was at any given moment, was worth more as a withheld card than as a stated position. When Philip II of Spain proposed to Elizabeth early in her reign in 1559, historians of the period generally conclude she understood that an outright refusal would close a diplomatic channel she still needed. An immediate acceptance would surrender her independence to a Catholic king her Protestant subjects would never accept. She did neither. She entertained the proposal. She allowed negotiations to continue. She let Philip's representatives believe that the match remained possible, which kept Spain from moving against her while she stabilized her throne and consolidated her religious reforms. When the suit had served its purpose, she declined, on grounds of religion and public opposition that, based on the careful management of the entire process, she appears to have understood perfectly well from the beginning. This sequence repeated across her entire reign. Philip II, Archduke Charles of Austria, Henry of Anjou, Francis of Alençon. Each courtship protracted, each commitment withheld, each suitor kept in a state of sustained hope that served England's interests without costing Elizabeth anything she had not already decided she would not give. A Spanish ambassador observed at one point that she had multiple suitors simultaneously and was keeping them all in hope, and concluded that this was her design, that in her need, they would each do more from rivalry than any of them would do from certainty. Historians who have studied her marriage negotiations have noted the same consistent pattern. Elizabeth never volunteered her position. She never gave a suitor a clear answer when ambiguity served her better. She never pre-committed to a negotiated outcome before the other party had exhausted their willingness to offer more in pursuit of a commitment she might yet give. As one historical assessment put it, Elizabeth skillfully exploited the diplomatic opportunities which her spinster status afforded her, which is a precise description of what it means to hold a position without conceding it before you must. The opposite approach, stating your position clearly, early, to make things easy for the other side, would have been political disaster. The moment any European power knew definitively that Elizabeth would not marry their candidate, they became a potential adversary rather than a hopeful suitor. The ambiguity was not indecision. It was the position itself. This is the principle that most people miss when they think about negotiation. Holding your position is not the same as being inflexible. Elizabeth eventually declined every proposal. She was not infinitely flexible. But what the historical pattern strongly suggests is that she declined each one only after the courtship had run its diplomatic course, after extracting whatever England could gain from the sustained uncertainty of the negotiation. The timing of each refusal, when examined against the foreign policy context of the moment, appears too deliberate to be coincidence. She never declined early or preemptively. She held the position until holding it produced diminishing returns, and then she released it. The person who self-negotiates has released the position before they have even taken it. They have given away the ambiguity before anyone has demanded clarity. And in doing so, they have surrendered the interval between stating terms and facing pressure. The interval where all the actual value in a negotiation tends to live. If self-negotiation is so costly, why is it so common? Why do people who are intelligent, capable, and experienced continue to soften their positions before they are tested? There are 4 specific psychological triggers. Understanding them is the prerequisite to interrupting them. The first is the fear of rejection, pre-managed as softening. The most common driver of self-negotiation is the anticipation of a no. You believe, consciously or not, that your ask is likely to be rejected, and so you reduce it before you make it. The self-deprecating preface, "I know this is probably too much," is a psychological insurance policy. If the ask is rejected, you have already acknowledged that the rejection was reasonable, so the refusal cannot sting as badly. The cost of this insurance is paid up front in the position itself. You have reduced your potential gain in exchange for reducing your potential embarrassment. This is almost always a bad trade, because the rejection you were managing for often does not come, and you have paid the cost of it regardless. The second is performing reasonableness to signal trustworthiness. Many people believe that showing flexibility and self-awareness makes them appear credible and trustworthy. That the person who says, "I understand if this doesn't work," is demonstrating the kind of balanced perspective that makes them safe to deal with. There is partial truth in this. Genuine flexibility is a virtue in ongoing relationships. But preemptive flexibility, offered before anyone has tested your position, does not signal trustworthiness. It signals that you are uncertain about the legitimacy of your own ask. And a person who is uncertain about the legitimacy of their position is a person who will move. The third is the confusion of empathy with accommodation. Thoughtful people often conflate the ability to see things from the other person's perspective with the obligation to accommodate that perspective in advance. You can understand what the other side needs without preemptively adjusting your terms to make it easier for them. Empathy is an information-gathering tool. It tells you what they value, what pressures they're under, what kind of response they're likely to give. Used well, it makes you a better negotiator because you understand the terrain. Used poorly, it becomes the mechanism by which you reduce your position to something you imagine they will find comfortable before they've asked for that reduction. The fourth, and the most insidious, is the desire to avoid the discomfort of the pause. When you state a position clearly and hold it in silence, the other person has to respond. There is a moment, sometimes brief, sometimes extended, where nothing is being said and both parties are waiting. That silence is uncomfortable. It creates social pressure on both sides of the table. Most people resolve this pressure by speaking. The self-negotiator fills the silence with additional justification, with a lower number, with an alternative option, with anything that ends the uncomfortable stillness of a held position. This is exactly wrong. The silence is where held positions demonstrate their strength. The person who fills it has moved. The person who holds it has won the moment. The practice is not complex. It is not comfortable. But it is simple enough to apply immediately. State the position. Then stop talking. Not after a preface. Not after an acknowledgement that the ask might be large. State what you want. State the terms. And then be quiet. Let the other person respond to what you actually want, not to a modified version of it that you have pre-adjusted to reduce their resistance. Every word you add after the position is stated is working against you, unless the other person has responded and asked for clarification. Treat silence as information, not as a problem to solve. When you state a position and the other person goes quiet, they are thinking, they are processing, they are deciding what they think about what you said. This is useful. The silence is working for you. Your job in that silence is to remain still, not to continue talking, not to add context, not to soften the ask because their face looks uncertain. Their face always looks uncertain. Wait for them to speak. Hear actual pressure before you respond to it. The version of pressure that lives in your head before the conversation is always more intense than the actual pressure the other side applies. Most self-negotiation happens in anticipation of pressure that never materializes. The discipline is to wait until you hear a specific objection, a specific counter, a specific no, and then respond to that, not to the imagined version of it that prompted you to soften your opening before you'd made it. Separate the ask from the justification. You do not need to explain why you want what you want in order to ask for it. Justification is optional. In most contexts, the more thoroughly you justify your position, the more material you provide for the other person to interrogate. State the position. If they ask why, answer briefly and precisely. If they don't ask, do not volunteer it. Recognize that a no is information, not a verdict. The fear underlying most self-negotiation is that stating the real position will result in a definitive no that forecloses the relationship or the deal. This fear is almost always disproportionate to the reality. A no is a response. It tells you what the other person's current position is. It is not the end of the negotiation. It is the beginning of understanding what the actual parameters are. The person who receives a no to their real position is in a better situation than the person who never stated it, because at least they know where the line is. The person who self-negotiated their way to a yes they didn't want is the one who has lost something they cannot recover. Rockefeller walked into 22 Cleveland refineries in 6 weeks with a pitch that did not apologize for itself. He had assessed the situation, determined the terms, and presented them as conclusions rather than opening bids. The people on the other side of those conversations received exactly as much room to negotiate as Rockefeller had decided to give them, and not a word more. Elizabeth held the question of her marriage in ambiguity for 45 years, not because she didn't know the answer, because the question was worth more as a question than any answer she could have given would have been worth. Both of them understood something that most people take decades to learn, and some never do. Your position is only yours until you give it away. The moment you introduce doubt about your own ask, the moment you soften it, hedge it, offer alternatives before they are requested, add the sentence that begins with, "I know this might be," you have transferred something irretrievable to the person across from you. They didn't do that. Machiavelli's prince does not announce the limits of his patience before they are tested. He does not explain what he would accept before anyone has refused what he wants. He states his position, holds it, and lets the people across from him decide what they will do about that. Ask for what you want, then stop talking